Hi, everybody. Deb and I are here today to talk about Template 2 and just read a little bit. This will probably be quite short, but we wanted to make sure that before we start our first class on February 28th, that we have the first set of Template 1 and Template 2 and the two observings to you. And also for those of you that are not taking the class, this is a public thing we're doing because there's no way to really explain the impact that the templates make on your life until you write them, until you see how your life begins to shift, how your consciousness begins to shift afterwards. But to start, I want to tell a story.
Mm.
So, this is the young woman that Beryl McCandless, she was an artist and she did all the glyphs for the creation templates. The first time I met Beryl was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This was back in the late 80s. No, it was actually in the early 80s. And she walked up to me at the end of the session I'd been giving, and she asked me if she could sing for me. And I said, sure. And she proceeded to sing.
Mm.
It was the most primordial, divine, heavenly
Mhm.
sound I'd ever heard in my whole life. It touched something in my being. And mostly in our human life, we're rarely touched in our being. But I could feel my being expanding out beyond the limitations of the human world I've been born into. And let's just say I became a fan. Then later on, as she worked with me for quite a while, later on, at her home, I got to see she was also an artist, that somehow she had been able to take this sound inside of her and make it into these incredible glyphs that held the resonance of creation in their sound and in their structure. Beryl died a few years ago. The most amazing thing about her death was there is really no way we can explain, those of us that have been doing the creation exercises and been inside of a collective held inside of the creation exercises or the creation templates. It's really hard to explain what it's like. It's different. There's just a huge capacity to be ever what you're being. But when Beryl was dying, I was her advocate and I was not where she was at the time. But at the time of her death in the hospital, the doctor was talking to me as her advocate about life choices. And I said, is she conscious? He said, yes. I said, is she cognitive? He said, yes. And then I said, why are you asking me? She's totally capable of answering herself. So she and he discussed her choices of her continuance and her ending. Uh, she made her decision. And then later on, her daughter told me that when they were ready to pull her off all the machines, she told her daughter a joke right before she died. So even though Deb and I are talking about something that looks mechanistic, it looks like it provides something mental, the consciousnesses that exist at 7 levels in these creation templates, many of us have gotten to live. And there's no real way to advertise them because any, you'll see in this write-up that Deb's going to read, any way that we would describe them would be living inside of the survival-based system of solving problems or fixing things or trying to get out of something that we presently live in. So this has been lived, these templates. These aren't just exercises to make money or to practice like meditation, although they are meditation. They are really to regenerate the neural fiber of our brain that once existed in unity with all life, whether it's a moment of life or a moment of death. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Deb, and I'm going to actually keep the glyph up while she reads, because there's more to consciousness than words. So if you would do me the pleasure of watching the glyph as Deb reads, that would be lovely. Deb, over to you.
Template 1 concerns the self with having. In a creation-based reality, having emerges from alignment with one's original design and participation in the field of creation. Having is the natural outpicturing of being in coherence. In a survival-based reality, having is organized around fear, deficiency, and compensation, often limited to material things. That said, having can also be associated with beliefs. The New Age talked much about how having the right thought would produce the right result. The flaw in this is that it still organizes having around control rather than coherence. Even when it sounds spiritual, this kind of having is still about trying to prove I am enough by getting more things, more approval, more certainty. In a creation-based framework, having is not acquisition, but embodiment. What is mine to have arises as a function of what I am being, doing, and embodying within the greater whole. In a survival construct, having attempts to fill what is missing. In a creation-based reality, having expresses what is already whole. Template 2 changes everything because it quietly relocates the axis of your life. In Template 2, Craving Being, I wrote, "It is not what happens to us in life, it is how we be with what happens that is the source of a fulfilled life." That sentence remains revolutionary to me. It shifts the center of gravity from circumstance to being, from events to ontology, from coping to embodiment. Template 2 does not ask, what am I trying to get? It asks, what am I craving to be? And then it reveals something subtle and profound. Craving being generates reality. The structure itself makes this clear. Craving being A creates being B. Sustaining that being embodies something further and eventually culminates in an embodied state that stabilizes a new field of identity. This is not self-improvement, it is architecture. We come to see that we have always been organized by modes of being, even when we do not recognize it. We crave to be safe, to be seen, to be powerful, to be loved, to be whole, to be significant. When this craving is unconscious, we attach being to circumstances. When being becomes conscious, we recognize that being itself is generative. The great wisdom traditions circle this same truth. The Upanishads declared Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that. Rumi wrote, you are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. Heidegger insisted that the essence of the human lies in existence, its being. Simone Weil said, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. David Hawkins wrote, power can be recognized only through inner awareness. Across cultures and centuries, the wides converge on this. We're not defined by events, but by the mode of being through which we live them. Template 2 operationalizes that convergence inside our own life. And yet being has been deeply missing. In my earlier work, I described how humanity collapsed into a reality of separation and how trauma set in at a cellular level. When trauma becomes the organizing force, survival becomes the default state of being. Coping replaces embodiment. Reaction replaces presence. Identity fuses with thought. When being collapses, I begin defining myself by profession, ideology, diagnosis, trauma, political position, relational status. I measure output more than coherence. I polish performance while presence thins. The cost is immense. Without conscious being, I cannot tell it like it is for myself. I inherit narratives. I defend constructs. I mistake reaction for truth. I participate in separation-based frameworks without perceiving their architecture. Template 2 restores our sovereignty. It asks us quietly and radically, how am I being with what is happening? That shift recenters you. Craving being returns agency without force, power without domination, coherence without suppression. When our neural fiber is reset, we can consciously crave being aligned with creation. The field from which thought arises is reorganized. The culmination of the template embodies a stabilized beingness. That stabilized beingness is no longer sourced in trauma. It is sourced in alignment. Alignment that expresses as coherence, cohesion, and congruence. Coherence means that we think, feel, and do, coherence means that what we think, feel, and do are no longer in conflict, but resonate within the same field. Cohesion means the parts of us, body, mind, emotion, spirit, move in relationship rather than fragmentation. Congruence means our inner experience and outer expression match. What we say reflects what we are actually being. When coherence, cohesion, and congruence are present together, being stabilizes as a lived reality rather than idea. This is why template 2 matters now more than ever. In a world saturated with reaction and polarization, the restoration of being is evolutionary. It is neurological repatterning. It is field coherence. It is civilizational repair. Being is not something we add to ourselves. Being is what we always have been before coping replaced embodiment. When we restore being, reality reorganizes, not by force, by field.
Thank you, Deb. I was thinking about this as you were reading, that's one of the hardest things to explain. I'm getting ready to have surgery on Tuesday, the 24th. I'm also aging. And my PT was here this morning preparing me for the surgery. And she said something about it would all work out fine. And I said, I'm just not a fan. I just don't want an alien in my knee. And we both burst out laughing. But in the presence of being, you just are being what you're being when you're being it. And when you don't have that freedom to be what you're being when you're being it, you're in the constructs of correct behavior. You're in the constructs of the socially correct world. And look what that got us. Deb, anything for you before we move on?
No, I think that not really. The statement of not by force, by field is really the most profound for me. And we're just beginning, we as a collective, humanity, is just beginning to discover what that is. But I really have found that moving with and from being is a through line.
And it has a strength stamina capacity that being at the effect of does not have.
Yes.
And we're in times of incredibly deep emotions. If you're a fan or not a fan of what is going on, the emotions are it's so intense they gear towards reaction. But there is a shift in beingness when you're not in survival. When you're in creation-based systems, it's a response, not a reaction. It's you present to what you're present to. It's your presence and the presence of what you're present to. It doesn't even have a vote. It's a condition of being. So we're going to close now. We'll post this. I'll post this later on today. And then we'll post the observing being next Tuesday, actually, while I'm in surgery. And then our class on the 7 levels of consciousness will start on February 28th. We good to go, Deb?
We're good to go.
All right. Take care, everybody.